Imagine being 16 years old and waking up one morning knowing that your family has almost nothing left. No savings, no comfortable backup plan, no successful relative waiting to help, and no father coming home from work that evening. Now imagine that instead of spending the rest of your life blaming circumstances, you notice something that everyone else has already decided is worthless. A pile of vegetables sitting behind a grocery store, bruised tomatoes, overripe potatoes, carrots that don't look perfect, onions that the store doesn't want anymore. To most people it's trash, but to a 16-year-old boy named Peter, it looked different. It looked like an opportunity. And what Peter did with those unwanted vegetables would eventually change the future of his family, create work for people around him, and teach him a lesson about wealth that his father had tried to teach him years earlier. But Peter didn't know any of that when his story began. All he knew was that his father was gone. Peter's father had worked in a mine for most of his adult life. It was hard work, dangerous work. The kind of job where a person left home in the morning and their family quietly hoped they would come back safely in the evening. Peter knew his father wasn't rich. They didn't live in a huge house. They didn't drive expensive cars. They didn't have money sitting around for emergencies. But somehow, his father always made sure there was food on the table. And he had a way of making Peter feel like they had more than they actually did. His father could take a few vegetables, some herbs, a little seasoning, and turn them into a meal that brought everyone to the table. Peter used to watch him cook. Sometimes he would stand nearby asking questions. His father would laugh. Then he would tell him something Peter didn't fully understand at the time. His father believed waste was one of the easiest ways to become poorer. If something could be repaired, repair it. If something could be reused, reuse it. If something could be turned into something useful, don't throw it away too quickly. Those words seemed ordinary until the day Peter needed them. The accident happened without warning. Peter's father went to work at the mine. He never came home. There are moments in life that divide everything into a before and an after. For Peter, that was the day. Before the accident, he was simply a teenager. After it, he suddenly felt responsible for things he had never had to think about before. The bills didn't disappear because his father was gone. Food didn't become free. The roof still needed repairs. Life kept moving even though Peter's family felt like theirs had stopped. Peter watched his mother trying to remain strong. He saw the worry on her face. He heard conversations about money that he had never paid much attention to before. And slowly, something became clear. They needed help. So Peter decided to find a job. He didn't ask for special treatment. He didn't expect anyone to hand him money. He simply wanted an honest opportunity to work. He walked from business to business. He asked store owners. He asked shopkeepers. He offered to carry boxes, clean, deliver things, or do whatever work was available. But Peter was 16, and that made things difficult. Some employers told him he was too young. Others said they didn't need anyone. One man listened to Peter's request, shook his head, and told him to try somewhere else. Peter thanked him and left. Then he tried again, then another, and another, and another. After a while, Peter stopped counting. One afternoon, he sat down by the side of the road, exhausted. He was hungry, he was frustrated, and for the first time he wondered if perhaps his situation really was hopeless. He looked at the people walking past him. Some were carrying groceries, some were heading home from work, others were talking about ordinary things. And Peter thought about how different life had become. He had been looking for someone to give him a chance, but nobody seemed willing. Then he remembered his father. Peter looked around. What did he actually have? Not much. But maybe not much was still something. The answer came unexpectedly. He was walking past a grocery store when he noticed employees carrying boxes toward the back. Peter slowed down. He watched as the workers opened the boxes and began throwing vegetables away. Tomatoes, potatoes, carrots, onions. Some were bruised. Some were overripe. Some simply didn't look attractive enough for customers. The store couldn't sell them, so they were going into the trash. Peter stared at them, and something clicked. He didn't see garbage. He saw ingredients. He remembered his father standing over a cooking pot. He remembered the smell of his father's soup filling their home. He remembered those simple meals that somehow tasted better than anything Peter had eaten outside. Then Peter did something that changed his life. He walked into the grocery store and asked the owner a question. The owner looked at him. Peter pointed toward the boxes. The owner raised an eyebrow. Peter wasn't completely sure, but he had an idea. The owner shrugged. Peter carried the vegetables home. He didn't simply dump them into a pot. He sorted through everything carefully. He removed the parts that were unusable. He washed what remained. Then he started thinking about his father's recipes. His father had never needed expensive ingredients. He understood flavor. He understood patience. He knew how to combine simple things. Peter remembered the herbs his father had used and gathered some that he knew were safe to use. There was only one problem. Peter didn't have the right equipment. He didn't have a right equipment. He didn't have a large cooking pot. He didn't have money to buy one. So he borrowed a pot. That was Peter's first business investment. Not a bank loan, not venture capital, a borrowed pot. He put the vegetables inside, added the herbs, added seasoning, and started cooking. As the soup simmered, the smell began drifting beyond the house. A neighbor walked by, then stopped. "Soup," Peter smiled. The neighbor laughed, but Peter wasn't laughing. For the first time in weeks, he felt something he hadn't felt since his father's death: hope. The next day, Peter decided to try something. He took the pot and set up a small stall. It wasn't much. A table, a few bowls, some soup, and a handwritten sign. Peter didn't have money for advertising. He couldn't afford a fancy storefront. He didn't even know if anyone would buy his food. But he had learned something from his father's death. Sometimes you don't get to wait until you're ready. Sometimes you have to start with what you have. The first person who approached Peter looked at the soup. Peter hesitated. Then he said something unusual. The customer looked confused. Peter continued. The customer tasted it. He waited, then took another spoonful. Peter watched nervously. Finally, the man reached into his pocket and paid. It wasn't much, but Peter had made his first sale. That tiny amount of money meant more to him than anyone could understand, because it proved something. He could create something people valued. He didn't need someone to give him a paycheck. He had found another way, and that was only the beginning. Word started spreading. One customer told another. Someone came back the next day, then brought a friend. Soon people were stopping by just to see what the 16-year-old boy was doing. But not everyone believed Peter would succeed. One local blacksmith was particularly skeptical. He walked past the store one afternoon and laughed. Peter nodded. The blacksmith shook his head. Peter didn't argue. He simply offered him a bowl. The blacksmith tasted the soup. He frowned. Peter waited. The blacksmith took another spoonful, then another. Finally, he looked at Peter. Peter told him. The blacksmith paid. Then he came back the next day, and the day after that. Peter didn't need to convince him with a speech. The product did the talking, and that was an important lesson. People don't pay you simply because you need money. They pay because you provide something they value. Peter was beginning to understand business without ever taking a business class. He had a product, he had customers, he had demand, and most importantly, he had learned how to turn limited resources into something useful. But then something unexpected happened. The grocery store owner heard about Peter's success. He remembered the boy who had asked for the vegetables everyone else considered worthless. Curious, he went to see the stall. When he arrived, he couldn't believe what he saw. There were customers waiting, people were eating, Peter was working. The grocery store owner watched for a while, then he tasted the soup. He looked at Peter. Peter nodded. The owner smiled. He finally understood what he had considered waste had become someone's raw material. And that distinction is bigger than it sounds, because almost everything valuable in the world begins as something that has to be transformed. Wood becomes furniture, steel becomes machinery. Flour becomes bread, knowledge becomes education, an idea becomes a business, a skill becomes a service, and a pile of unwanted vegetables can become a meal. The raw material is only part of the story. The other part is what someone knows how to do with it. Peter's business continued growing, but eventually he faced a problem he had never expected. There were too many customers. He couldn't prepare everything alone. He couldn't collect ingredients, cook, serve customers, handle money, and keep everything organized by himself. So Peter began working with people in the neighborhood. One person helped gather ingredients, another helped prepare the vegetables, someone else helped serve customers. Peter started sharing the work, and as the business grew, so did the opportunities. The boy who had been unable to find someone willing to employ him was now creating work for other people. Eventually, Peter saved enough to open a small storefront. It wasn't fancy. It didn't look like the restaurants you see in downtown New York or Los Angeles. There was no expensive designer interior, no celebrity chef, no investors waiting in the background. It was simply a small place with good food and a story behind it. But when Peter opened the doors for the first time, he stood quietly for a moment. He remembered that grocery store. He remembered the rejected job applications, he remembered his father's kitchen, and he remembered how hopeless everything had felt. Now he was standing inside a business he had built himself. But Peter didn't allow success to erase his past. He remembered what it felt like to struggle. He remembered what it felt like to struggle. He remembered what it felt like to be 16 and have no idea what tomorrow would bring. And he noticed something. There were other young people around him facing the same kind of uncertainty. Some came from families struggling financially. Some had dropped out of school. Some didn't know what they were good at. Peter could have ignored them. He had finally made something of himself. He could have focused on growing his own business. Instead, he decided to teach. He showed young people how the business worked, how to prepare food, how to talk to customers, how to keep track of expenses, how to manage small amounts of money, how to solve problems. But there was one lesson Peter cared about more than all the others. He taught them how to look at things differently. He told them that sometimes the thing everyone else ignores may contain an opportunity. And he always remembered his father's words. Peter eventually realized that his father had left him an inheritance. It wasn't money, it wasn't property, it wasn't a business. It was a way of thinking, and perhaps that was worth more than money. Now, there is something important about Peter's story that we shouldn't misunderstand. The lesson isn't that poverty is simply a mindset. Real financial hardship is complicated. People can struggle because of unemployment, economic conditions, family circumstances, disasters, lack of access to opportunity, and many other reasons. Not everyone who works hard immediately succeeds. And sometimes people need genuine support before they can even begin rebuilding their lives. But Peter's story teaches us something different. Your circumstances can be real without being permanent. Peter couldn't change what happened to his father. He couldn't control his age. He couldn't force employers to hire him. He couldn't magically create money. But he could decide what to do with the resources available to him. And that decision became his turning point. That change in thinking was everything. Because when you're always waiting for someone else to create an opportunity for you, you may miss the opportunities that are already around you. Peter's first opportunity didn't look impressive. It was a pile of bruised vegetables. His first piece of equipment wasn't impressive either. It was a borrowed cooking pot. His first marketing strategy wasn't complicated. His first customer didn't make him rich. His first massive wasn't a massive success. But he started. And starting gave him something that waiting never could. Experience. Every customer taught him something. Every mistake taught him something. Every sale taught him something. Every problem forced him to improve. That's how the little business became a bigger one. Not overnight, not through some magical shortcut, but through hundreds of small decisions, and that may be one of the most realistic lessons in Peter's story. We often look at successful people and focus on where they ended. We see the business, the money, the success, the comfortable life, but we don't see the first awkward attempt. We don't see the rejection. We don't see the uncertainty. We don't see the uncertainty. We don't see the days when they wondered whether their idea would work. Peter experienced all of that, and he kept going. If you're still watching this, I want you to take a moment and think about Peter's situation. He didn't have everything he needed. He didn't even have most of what he wanted, but he had something, a recipe, a skill, a willingness to work. a borrowed pot, and a pile of vegetables nobody wanted. That was enough to begin, and sometimes that's all a beginning requires. Not everything, just something. Something you can build on. Something you can build on. Something you can improve. Something you can learn from. So here's a question for you. If you were in Peter's position, what would you have that? Would you have seen garbage, or would you have tried to turn them into something valuable? I'd genuinely like to know. Drop your answer in the comments, and while you're down there, tell me this. What is one skill, resource, or opportunity you already have that you might be overlooking? You never know. Your answer might give someone else an idea. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like Peter's coming, and each one carries a lesson about money, resilience, ambition, and the decisions that can change a person's life. Now, back to Peter. As the years passed, the business continued to grow. But Peter never forgot that everything began with something small. One bowl, one sale, one decision. That's how progress often works. We want dramatic transformations. We want to wake up one morning and discover that everything has changed. But real progress usually doesn't happen that way. It happens quietly. A decision today, a skill learned tomorrow, a mistake corrected next week, a customer served well, a mullah faved, a problem solved, a relationship built, and eventually, those small actions begin to compound. Peter's success wasn't created by one magical moment. It was built from dozens, then hundreds, of ordinary moments. And perhaps the most beautiful part of his story was that he didn't keep the lesson to himself. He used what he had learned to help other people. That is when wealth becomes something bigger than personal comfort. When what you've learned can help somebody else. When your experience can shorten another person's struggle. When your success can create opportunities instead of simply separating you from everyone else. Peter understood that. His father had spent his life trying to provide for his family. Peter continued that mission in a different way. He created something that could support not only his family, but other families too. And all of it started with a lesson about waste. Think about how strange that is. The grocery store wanted to get rid of the vegetables. Peter wanted them. The store thought it was getting rid of a problem. Peter thought he was receiving an opportunity. The vegetables didn't change. Peter's perspective did. And sometimes, that's where the first step toward a better future begins. Not with having more, but with seeing differently. So the next time you find yourself thinking, I don't have enough, pause. I'm not saying your problems aren't real. I'm not saying money doesn't matter. It does. I'm asking you to look one step further. What do you have? What can you improve? Who can you help? What problem can you improve? Who can you help? What problem can you solve? What do people around you need? And what could you create from the resources already within your reach? Because Peter's story proves something simple. The beginning doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be real. A borrowed pot can be a beginning. A single customer can be a beginning. A rejected idea can be a beginning. A difficult season can even become a beginning. Peter couldn't bring his father back. He couldn't undo the accident. But he could undo the accident. But he could having his father's with Perturbit, and that's exactly what he did. His father had taught him not to waste what he had. Peter didn't waste the lesson. He turned it into action. He turned action into a business. He turned the business into opportunity. And eventually, he turned opportunity into something he could share with others. That was his father's real legacy. Not a bank account, not property, not a pile of money. A way of seeing the world. A belief that ordinary things can become extraordinary when they are placed in the hands of someone willing to work, learn, and create. And maybe that's the lesson Peter would want you to remember. You don't have to know exactly where you're going. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to wait until the conditions are perfect. Peter asked that question when he had almost nothing. And that question changed his life. So I'll leave you with one final thought. The next opportunity in your life may not arrive looking like an opportunity. It might look like a problem. It might look like rejection. It might look like a skill nobody seems to care about. It might look like a small idea that feels too ordinary to matter. Or, like Peter's opportunity, it might look like something everyone else has already thrown away. Don't be too quick to decide that something has no value. Sometimes the value isn't in what something is today. Sometimes the value is in what it could become. Peter didn't inherit wealth from his father. He inherited wisdom, and he turned that wisdom into something valuable. So if this story meant something to you, like the video, share it with a friend or family member who could use the reminder, and subscribe to the channel. And before you leave, answer this in the comments. If you could turn one ordinary thing in your life into an opportunity, what would it be? Maybe it's a skill, maybe it's an idea. Maybe it's a problem you've been trying to solve. Maybe it's something you've been overlooking. Tell me in the comments, because you never know who might read your answer and realize that they have an opportunity of their own. Peter started with a few discarded vegetables, but he didn't see what they were. He saw what they could become. And sometimes that's the difference between having nothing and discovering that you already have enough to begin.